All right, so this is John Chen, and I am currently in Ashland, Oregon. And let's see, hold on a second. There we go. So I'm in Ashland, Oregon. I'm super excited because on this trip, I've gotten a chance to meet someone who I've never met in person. I'm here at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. We came down specifically to see him. Here at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, we've seen Romeo and Juliet, and we also saw Rent. They did an amazing scene of Rent, of which where my friend Gordon Vernon was the American Sign Language interpreter for that event. It was so good, it just made us cry. So I'm broadcasting live from Ashland, Oregon. This is my funny part today. I accidentally did not block my calendar today, so I had 10 meetings on the schedule, and so did I think about canceling? Sure, but then I'm like, why not? Why don't we just make them? So I'm here on this beautiful picnic table, looking out at beautiful Ashland, Oregon today, where we have this engaging virtual meetings podcast. Today, I'm super excited to introduce you this gentleman. I met him at Tony Robbins Global Youth Leadership Summit, and I was more and more astounded the more and more I got to meet him. He's been on Good Morning America. He achieved financial independence, retirement early at the young age of 36, which he now calls F.I.R.E, which he has a book about, and he almost burned his house down in his youth. Let's welcome to the stage the one and only Michael Quan. Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Hey, John, how's it going? Great to see you.
Well, we're here and the fire alert is like really hot. It's a high level here in Ashland, Oregon. And by the way, I had a friend who performed here and actually got smoked out 3 or 4 years ago because of the forest fires. So,
Oh,
so
no.
Michael, we got to ask the opening question, which is, how did you almost burn your house down?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it was more than once. It was actually three times. First time was when I was a kid. I was trying to light a firecracker in my palm tree, and it was one of these ones that had a fuzzy trunk. So it was it was basically like tinder. And so that was once. Another time, I got bored over the summer. And so I was mixing up some, let's say, oil and alcohol on the stove, and it started popping out. And then so the floor caught on fire. So I had to take care of that one. And then the third time, John, was in my backyard when my cousin and I had taken apart some fireworks, and yeah, it didn't go so well because we basically burned the whole lawn. Anyway, the irony of this all, right, is that now I talk about fire, but in a different context.
I think you might have to incorporate this into your keynote, but it does tell me something too, Michael. Well, so I have to now share out. Like I almost burned my house down too, and I think it was something with a lighter and paper towels on the counter. And when something lights to the point that you can't like tamp it down, like we tried to do it, and the sparks like fell onto the carpet, and
Oh no.
and of course, like I think it was the early like nylon carpet, so like you have a little bit of that burn on the carpet.
Yep.
And then we were trying to cover that so my mom didn't know. But luckily, my mom has left us, and now she thinks it's funny. She didn't think it was it's probably serious, and she would have known at the time. Oh my gosh, Michael, so great! I was so great to meet you at Tony Robbins Global Youth Leadership Summit. Thank you, of course, for volunteering your time to be there as a captain, like I did. And yeah, so for my friends who don't know you, do us a favor, take a moment to introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, my name is Michael Quan, as you mentioned, and I live down in San Diego, California. I actually grew up in the LA area, but moved down there about 25 years ago now. I went down there for school and just never left. I love it down here. I love the weather and the beaches and the sun. But I like to play a lot of tennis, so that's another reason, as well as fishing. But really, my story is one of, I think, getting lucky. I really live a lucky life in some regards. And this does require, I think, some intentionality. But I will tell you, John, in my early years, as a kid, other than burning my house down, right, I was very curious, as you can tell, right? I was very curious. I wanted to always figure out how things worked. And I had a couple of uncles that were, they did very well with buying real estate assets. And so they didn't have to work a traditional job. They got to make their own hours, and they got to do whatever they wanted. And I was like, that's fascinating. I want that life too. And both of my parents were working. They had divorced when I was about 12 or so. So I saw them working really hard. And while I respected that, I also thought, well, what if I model my uncles who don't have to like work this hard, right? And because we all have the same amount of time in the day. And I got just very curious, and I was like, how did they do that? And so really, I took it upon myself to really make a study of how people were able to create financial freedom early in life. And so that's kind of, what started me off. And just out of college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went into tech, because at the time that was really the booming industry. At the tail end of the dot-com boom, as you know, John, we had companies like eBay and Google and Facebook. Well, actually, Facebook wasn't even around at that time, but Amazon, all these companies were coming out. And unfortunately, after I'd been working for about a year and a half, 9/11 hit. And so that basically, popped the balloon, right? So everything imploded at that point. And so what happened was the company that I was working for, they were, I think, about the 6th round of layoffs. And I was just thinking to myself, do I really want to hang out for the 7th round? Because my name's going to likely be on the 7th, maybe 8th, whatever it was. We had shrunk by over half of the size that we were within like probably a month. And so I got a couple of buddies of mine and I said, hey, you know what? We're pretty much the only profitable division in our company because we did IT support and integration for other companies. We were like consultants. And so I was like, why don't we do our own thing? And that was basically my first foray into business and entrepreneurship. And we just hit the ground running. We ended up working from our homes for the first year, getting on our hands and knees, plugging in Ethernet cables and, doing the support. I was doing the accounting and all the back end operations because my dad was a CPA. So it kind of fell on my shoulders and I didn't mind it. And eventually we started to be able to grow this company. And it was just a really great time of learning about myself and growth and figuring out what didn't work. We figured out a lot of things that didn't work.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, I mean, what I said earlier was, I live lucky in the sense that I would always try different things, right? And see what happened. And I feel like anytime I put myself out there, then good things have come along. And so we had different opportunities along the way where we were able to acquire other smaller companies, and that grew our business. And, thankfully, over the span of about 10 years, we were able to grow the business to, a decent sized team. We had about 12 people or so. And then kind of got a little jaded just because, I've been working on this for a while. I really wanted to grow the business to the next level. I had some other partners that, just enjoyed the lifestyle business and they weren't really interested in creating beyond that. And so we got a couple of unsolicited offers to sell the company. And I was like, you know what? Here's a great chance to basically pull out some equity and also potentially team up with a company that can expand this even further. We had an office in San Diego and then also Chicago, and they had a national footprint. So we're like, well, let's see where this goes. All right. So cash out some equity. I took that money, I put it into real estate, and long story short, the company that we basically got acquired by ended up being morally corrupt, for lack of that's a euphemism in many senses, but yes, they were morally corrupt on more fronts than one.
Wow.
But what happened was that gave me the opportunity to leave that company because I wasn't going to work with people that, we had very varying values. For example, let me just give you an example of that. So for example, being the guy that was doing the finances and whatnot, I always paid my bills on time. I thought that's what you do. You charge up your Amex and then you pay it off, right? Well, they thought otherwise. They were, well, let's just charge up the Amex and then let's just not pay it. Or let's go buy $250,000 of data center equipment, servers and network switches and all these things, and then let's not pay it. And then when they finally complain after about 8 or 9 months, then we'll negotiate and then pay them a fraction of it. Or we just won't pay them at all. And then we'll BK the entity. Anyway, long story short, it was that, again, I didn't obviously mesh with how they did business because it was horrible. So the opportunity here, though, John, was that I decided to leave. And so because I had an employment agreement, they had to pay me out, and then they were paying out, the portion that I had sold to them.
Yeah.
And that gave me the opportunity to so-called retire early. My daughter was 1 at the time, and I realized that I had a very unique opportunity here to be present with my family. And then I also remembered, having this life of complete financial freedom. And it was just enough money where I didn't have to worry about money anymore or going back to work. And so I was like, let me see if I can, swing this and make this work with the real estate and whatnot. And knock on wood, it's been it's been 10 years since that happened now. And,
Wow.
things have been going well. But in between there, after that, I was raising my family, being very present.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I wanted to do more, because even though the whole retire early, a lot of times people think they want to retire early, and it's great. Don't get me wrong, it's fantastic. However, there's more for us to do, right? As you know, John, in the Tony Robbins environment, we have to grow in order to have progress, right? And progress
Right.
equals happiness. And so I realized that, it was really great. I was serving, being present with my family. However, I wanted to do more. So I started blogging about personal finance, about
Hmm.
my journey, about different strategies that I had learned over the years in order to build financial independence, be able to retire early. And so I started a blog called Financially Alert. And Financially Alert then spawned coaching opportunities for me. It spawned a number of different other side businesses, selling things on Amazon, doing masterminds, lots of different things that I get to dabble in nowadays, because I have the flexibility and freedom to do that. But it's
Well,
really about helping to serve people and help them to get on that journey of financial freedom so that they can ultimately share their gifts with the world, um, without having money be a hindrance. So you're not having to work for money. You get to choose what you want, just being very intentional.
what it because it is a goal that a lot of people say they want, but I know you probably have enough personal experience. Like, what do you think feels like the number one thing holding most people back from this spot of freedom?
Yeah. The number one thing, John, is mindset, and to be honest, um, it's
Right.
that mindset. And again, I was lucky because I don't get to choose, who my parents were. I didn't get to choose who my uncles were, right?
Right. Right.
But it's my uncles that gave me the insight that this was even possible, because most of us never even understand that this is possible. Maybe later on in life, you might get inspired. You see now, actually nowadays, it's great because we have the internet, we've got books, we've got all these
Yeah.
different channels on YouTube. You can actually get inspired by people that are, similar to you. And there's so many different types of entrepreneurs. So the great thing now is that we can get inspired, but you have to realize that it's possible for you. And so a lot of times we hang on to these limiting beliefs. We hang on to these ideas that maybe we grew up with in our environment. Maybe it's from our parents, our guardians, our friends and family.
Yeah.
And if you realize that this is just a belief that we have based off of, certain circumstances in our life, and we want to change it, as soon as you change that belief, then you're going to take new action, right? And as soon as you take new action, you're going to get a different result. And so that's the biggest key, John, is the mindset.
Well, I love that. I mean, I think, like being at Microsoft was definitely a once in a lifetime experience, especially at the time that I was there. And so many people, I thought it was really interesting that there were two things prevalent then, like everyone's talking about imposter syndrome now, but back then, most of the developers who finally made it right at Microsoft, I got a chance to ask a lot of them questions, and the first response from a lot of people is saying, I don't deserve it. And I said, okay, why? What do you mean? And they would say, look, me and all these other smart people, graduated from some good college, whatever, and some of them still have jobs, and I have this disproportionate amount of wealth, right? And I said, what makes me any better than any of those other programs? Some of them were better programmers than me. So they looked at that opportunity and one, didn't realize it. Number two is most of them didn't think about how to do something bigger with it. I was very surprised at the number of people who did not think about using it for contribution,
Hmm.
right? Because if you get that much wealth, one of the kind of responsibilities or things is like, how can we give, a portion of it back? I mean, it's good for you on the tax side, but it's also good for your soul side, because you end up, being able to do these things that you wish you always could have done. And a lot of them had not thought about it. And so I thought that was an interesting mindset that they said they didn't deserve it. I'm curious about one thing though, and I want to say hi to Kristen. Kristen Lestotis is watching us on Facebook Live. Thanks for checking us out. Michael, now too, in the last couple of years, where has virtual come into this place of being able to help and inspire people for you?
Yeah, virtual's been great, especially because I, do a lot of things from home and I have my home office. Being able to connect to people over Zoom has been, a game changer, especially, during COVID times and whatnot. And just because like your reach is so much easier and better, and you can
Mm.
connect with so many different people. It's been fantastic. I run a mastermind right now. And I have, people from all over the country that we all kind of meet up, twice a month. and we're able to share ideas. So virtual has been a game changer. And I loved seeing the evolution of this over time. Even with my IT company that I had before, we started doing some of the remote operations and management. And once we kind of got that dialed down, I mean, the margins were incredible, right? Once you get that dialed in. And so it's just great to kind of see this evolution of being connected. And so I'm super excited, as you can go further, right? And we're going to get some of the AR and the VR going as well. We're still not quite there yet, but they've got the hollow box and all these different things where you can, looks like someone's literally sitting in the room with you. I'm super excited about the future. I mean, it's a new way to connect, and I think it's fantastic. And you're doing amazing things, John. I mean, the things that you do, just FYI, I mean, I'm amazed. I'm like, I didn't know you could do that with Zoom. I didn't know you could do that. And you integrate such great energy into it. And so there's always that next level. And so I love seeing you push the envelope with that.
Well, it takes these pioneers. I want to give a shout out to Sylvie too. Sylvie is with the National Speakers Association, and I think they use something. I don't know if all the technical terms. It's like laser mesh. So basically, what she did is projected on front of her. She had a screen that she presented behind it, but the screen is see-through, and she was presenting models of a brain, right? So that she could actually point inside of the brain, right? Like these other parts that during her presentation, it was kind of next level stuff. So like there's a lot on the innovation space that is really going, that you're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years, because I think a lot of minds were opened up in what could be done virtually. Michael, I'm curious, what do you do in your masterminds? I mean, in masterminds, you really want people to share stuff, right? And sometimes it's uncomfortable or real or business stuff, right? Whether it's financially or with their relationships. What's one of the ways that you get people to start talking inside of those masterminds?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. And just really a quick step back. The reason why I have a big passion for masterminds is when I was running my business, I ended up joining a business mastermind. And it really gave me the ability to connect with other business owners that were having similar issues, similar problems, but in different industries. And so we'd come together like once a month and just be able to kind of share what's going on. And when you get that collective brain trust to really kind of work on a program or work on a problem together, you get a different answer, but it's a kind of like a laser focused answer. And we don't know what we don't know, right? But when you bring together like people that you care about, and they're all kind of focusing and working together, then all of a sudden you're able to move faster and quicker than you would have otherwise been able to do by yourself. And so that's why I really love masterminds. And so when I finally, kind of did the whole retire early thing, I also kind of got to that space where I was blogging, I was starting to do coaching, and I was kind of just off on my own. And I was like, I need to connect more with people with like-minded values and whatnot. And so actually that's why, I went to some of the Tony Robbins, environment and connect with people there. So I have some masterminds with people in the Tony Robbins environment, but I also have the business mastermind for people that do online business. And so that's really kind of what got me to a place where now I like to speak with other people, because I was very timid. I was very shy. Even after selling my company, I was a very passive, I'd say leader. I was a leader, but I was a very passive leader, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm to the point where it's more about sharing, because I'm kind of getting outside of my head. And now the mastermind that I run is all about how to invest into real estate and use that as a vehicle to create financial freedom. So it's really about helping people to come in, understand, the different opportunities. But more importantly, we talked about the mindset before, right? A lot of times we have these self-limiting beliefs that are holding us back. And so we get to work on that. We can be like, okay, where are you stuck, right? And sometimes people think it's a strategy issue, and sometimes it may be, but most of the times it's up here, right? It's like, well, they think that they can't do something because X, Y, Z. And then the mastermind can basically help them and say, hey, you know what? You can do this. Let me show you how. And I believe in you. And so when you get that support and you get that love and connection, then you're just able to move forward in a way, like I like to call it, you're getting pulled to your goals instead of having to push yourself. Of course, people can do it on their own. You can push yourself to do anything, right? But do you want to? I think it's a lot more fun if it's a team sport, right? And you get pulled along the way and you're having fun along the way. You get the best of both worlds. And so that's why I love masterminds, John.
Inspiration, not perspiration. Now, how many masterminds are you a part of right now?
I got about 3 at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, that's not bad. What's the maximum number you've had?
About 5, I'd say.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
But 5 is, I mean, it's a time commitment in that part. And let's see now, wait, who's the original who made masterminds really famous? Like, was it Think and Grow Rich? Was it
Yeah,
Napoleon?
Napoleon Hill. Yeah,
Yeah,
Napoleon Hill
like
is the one that
so.
really kind of talked about that openly. I think he was one of the original people that did that. Yeah.
Despite all the new tech and things like that, some of this old school stuff, like a mastermind, still works. Although done in this new tech way, makes it even more powerful because now you can get international points of view, right, as opposed to just people that are in your physical space. So I think that's super cool.
Absolutely.
Uh, oh my goodness. All right, let's talk about your Good Morning America. So that you got on Good Morning America. Can you share some behind the scenes stories about how you got on Good Morning America?
Absolutely. Well, John, as I was mentioning before, you know, public speaking was one of my biggest fears before. Just to get on a call with you, like if we'd done this maybe like, let's say 5-6 years ago, I'd be like shaking. I would be like, I don't know, John, I don't feel so well. Maybe we'll push this off to another day. Um, and what happened was actually the masterminds and being in an environment really gave me the confidence to move forward. And I'll quickly share a quick story with you, John. It was actually because of the Global Youth Leadership Summit that gave me the opportunity to start public speaking. Because when we go and we volunteer at this Global Youth Leadership Summit, right, we're there supporting kids and we're giving them tools and strategies to step into their own identities and to really empower them to communicate and share. And so when I was there, my first couple of years, I was just like amazed. I'm like, this is just a great environment for the kids to really step up and own their greatness. And even though I'd done some cool things, like, had this business that I'd sold and I had my financial freedom or whatnot, I still was very insecure on being able to communicate my ideas. And because I was insecure in communicating my ideas, I was not saying anything to anyone. I would just kind of, support from behind the scenes. And again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, except that there was something kind of gnawing at me that I needed to share more. And so what happened was, one of the opportunities that we get as coaches is we do a board break for the kids, meaning that they write down on a piece of wood a limiting belief that they have, and then they punch through it, right? And so the whole idea with that is to ultimately have them break that limiting belief. And it's a super incredible, empowering process, as you know, John. And then the great thing is we get to do that as well, right, as coaches. Yeah. And so what I wrote on my board the first year was that no one wants to hear what I have to say. That was my limiting belief. And I truly felt that, intellectually, I knew that wasn't necessarily true, but inside, that's what was like eating at me. I was like, people don't want to hear what I have to say. And so what happened was, the first year I broke through it, but it was more of a kind of just like, I can break this board, right? And it didn't really integrate with me. And so I came back, I think like 2 or 3 years later, and I found myself writing the same exact limiting belief on the board again. And this was back in 2019.
Wow.
So we're talking about what, 3.5, 4 years now at this point. And this time though, something was different. I really concentrated on what that meant by breaking through to it. And when I broke through it, something kind of snapped and I was like, all right, I'm not necessarily confident in my ability to speak, but I feel like I'm required to speak in order to serve other people. And the craziest stuff happened, John. And I'm leading up to the whole GMA thing, right? The craziest stuff started happening after I broke through that board. Literally a day later, one of the other coaches said, hey, you work in personal finance, right? And I was like, yeah, I have a blog. I talk about financial freedom. She's like, yeah, I told Marlon, who's the main facilitator and presenter at GYLS.
Amazing.
And he was like, yeah. And then he's an amazing international speaker. And she's like, he wants to speak with you. And I was like, oh, really? Okay. I've gone to this thing like 3 years in a row. I've never spoken to the guy, right? He's usually busy off in the green room and, kind of larger than life. And I was like, you sure he wants to talk to me? And again, I had these limited beliefs that he didn't even want to talk to me. And so I go and I'm like, well, if the opportunity presents itself, then maybe I'll go chat with him, right? And lo and behold, we ended up connecting on the very last night. And what happened was he was just the most genuine individual. And he's like, Michael, he's like, I feel that we're called to do something together. And I was like, okay. Well, let's do something together. And Marlon lives all the way in North Carolina. I live in San Diego, so we're cross coasts. And guess what, John? Through the power of virtual meetings, Zoom engagement, right? We were able to connect. And we started a podcast. Now it's been like 3.5 years ago.
But now, wait, what's the name of this podcast? Because I listened to an episode, Michael.
Yeah, so the name of this podcast is called Breakthrough Millionaire.
Right.
And it's all about building wealth from the inside out. And so we talk about how to build wealth monetarily, but also internally, right? And so part of my journey, of course, was just getting behind the microphone in the first place because I was terrified. Marlon was like, let's do a podcast. I'm like, okay. And again, I tell you this because I like to live lucky, right? So I'm like, well, if I'm living lucky and I've got an international speaker that's willing to do a podcast with me, I'm going to go for it, right? And so I step forward and then I start doing this. And I was terrible. I was horrible. I mean, you should have heard, all the ums and the ahs and the filler words and whatever else I was saying or not saying. And it was terrible. But guess what, John? You do anything 100 times, right? You're going to get better. Yes. And so now we're on, I think, like episode 180 or whatnot. So I feel much more confident. And the great thing about that, John, is that each time that there was another, I think, stepping stone along the way, I got different opportunities. Yeah. And so about maybe 100 episodes in, a local news, the local CBS News here in San Diego said, hey, do you want to come on the news and share about your book that you had written? And I was like, sure, why not? And sorry, I fast forward a little bit, but I actually ended up getting the book deal after I started, this whole process as well. And that's part of sharing my voice as well. So the nice thing was it was kind of nice and gradual. First it was like, oh, do you want to write a book? I was like, sure, let's write a book. So I wrote the book, right? And then from there, I got some press about the book. And then because of the press, then the news team said, hey, do you want to come in the news? And I was like, oh man, that was super terrifying. But I wanted the news and I did that. And then guess what? You do it and it's not as scary as you think. And then you're like, oh, I can do this again. So they invited me back. And so I did that a few different times. And then just most recently, John, like this last month, I got a text message from Good Morning America. And they're like, hey, we found some article about you on Business Insider. Would you want to, come on and interview for early retirement? And I was like, absolutely, right?
Now, Michael, wait, hold on a second. Let me just remind you, right? I dated somebody in PR at one time. Like Good Morning America is like the Super Bowl of PR. Right. I mean, this is like there's very few things better than getting a nationally syndicated show like Good Morning America to put you on. Right. So
yeah. And the great, the interesting thing, John, is that you say that, when I did finally get this opportunity, it was fantastic. And, I think I felt pretty comfortable at this point in time. So if we rewind all the way back, I was much more terrified just getting in front of this, microphone in the beginning with the podcast, or even going to talk to Marlon. Those are the hardest times, is getting out of that initial belief of what you can and you can't do. Yeah.
The first step is way harder.
Yeah. For those of you that are listening, I really want to share that because sometimes it's those moments in time right now where we think we can't do something. That's the hardest part, because once you get the momentum and you get some of these lucky opportunities that kind of start flowing, the GMA thing, people are like, oh, wow, Good Morning America. Well, yeah, that was great. But it was actually the small things that terrified me in the beginning. It was willing to be terrible on the microphone for the first 30, 40 episodes, right? But putting yourself in I think, a position of having people that can support you and surround you, whether it's a mastermind, whether it's going to volunteer and getting stuff back in return, because that was the last thing that I was there to do. It was, just to go there and volunteer and serve. And in return, I got back like so much, John. It was crazy. And I feel like this year, even more. I got to meet you, John, finally. We got to engage, and now we're going to do something too. I already know it, right? So the ripple effect is amazing as you kind of go out there. But I think you do have to step in to the opportunities, right? You still have to do your part. And as Marlon and I like to say on our podcast, Breakthrough Millionaire, it's kind of this co-creating with God, right? We pray as though it all depends on God.
So wait, Michael, say that again. Make sure I get that.
Yeah.
What is it? It's co-creating with God.
Co-creating with God.
Okay, go.
So the whole idea of co-creating with God is meaning that we pray as though it all depends on Him, but we act as it all depends on us.
Wow.
So let that sink in, right?
Say it one
We
more
pray
time.
that it co-creating with God means that we are praying is that it all depends on him,
Yeah.
but we're acting as though it all depends on us.
Wow, that's really good, Michael. I just want to share this. By the way, Kristen and now, I told you that she was watching. She's fully in here. It's like she's got this IDK. I get overwhelmed when I think about going to TR stuff, right? That's Kristen, take the first step, right? Listen to any YouTube or go back to the old school tape program, right? And if you feel so called, then go, right? By the way, Michael and neither one of us get any compensation if you go. We go because it worked for us. She said, yep, heard that for sure. She said, right on, right? She understands about the stuck place. So she's like listening into this. I do have one other question that kind of around this part too, Michael, around the non-speaking. I do a lot of work around the Stop Asian Hate movement, and I've formulated a lot of group, including the first ever API or Asia Pacific Islander Tony Robbins group. And I'm curious if you feel like was some of the cultural piece there about not speaking? Did any of that show up for you?
That's a really good question. I think there was a little bit about that, but not necessarily that much. I mean, I would say definitely some of my friends and family, because I'm a third generation Chinese American.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't necessarily see as much as some of my, friends that were a little bit closer, like, first and second generation.
Right.
So for me, I feel like we were kind of integrated. However, the parts where I really kind of got in my head and I was like not wanting to, communicate with people, it was just, I think I grew up in certain situations where, for example, I know one in high school, like I had really bad acne, right? So I never wanted to look anyone in the face, right? I'm always looking down. I'm always looking away because I'm like, oh, they're gonna look, see my pizza face, right, or whatever. And so that was one of the the big things, right? But even after it went away, right, even after the hormones wore off, I was still into this state of being, right, and I'd already built these limiting beliefs. And so even though I can look at people in the face and not, feel that anymore, it was still, in the back of my head. So it's interesting. I think if we go back and look at specific times in our lives, we can kind of sometimes identify these things that might make us shy away. I do remember also my mom did say at certain points when I was younger, she would say, oh, my kids are just shy. Right. And so we start to identify.
That's a parental thing, right? That
it is a
they're
parental
saying,
thing.
they have good intention for it, but you hear that, right? And you take a Kathy Buckley lesson and like you own that piece or about being shy, it'll crush you. So I think there's two great things that you talked about there too. This residual image of yourself in the past can actually influence you if you're not aware.
Mm-hmm.
Because look, and by the way, too, I'm gonna just comment. It looks like Michael has like either a flawless skin routine or he's got the Zoom filter turned on high. But they both look marvelous, Michael. They look marvelous. Yeah. Oh my God. Right. And so how did you get rid of some of that? I mean, what was that last key step for you? Besides breaking the board, was there something else that got you out of the shy or out of the stuff? And by the way, Chris is blowing up our Facebook feed. Thank you for that, Chris.
Well, thank you, Kristen. I'm glad that you're engaged with the conversation here.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I mean, it's a journey, right? I mean, there's definitely steps along the way. However, I want to do say that breaking that board was literally a decision. And so I think it's important for us to realize that we're going to have a journey along the way. And, things aren't going to happen instantly. I told you that the first time I broke through the board was I think like a year or two before that. I had the same exact limiting belief. So it didn't go away instantly, right?
Yeah.
But we have to be, I think, aware enough that it's there.
Yeah.
And then we have to decide not only here, but also here if we want to change it, right? And so let me give you the key, John. I think the real key that I figured out for myself, and I didn't understand this for the longest time, but if you get outside of yourself and you come up with a reason to do something beyond yourself. So for example, in the beginning, I was just worried about how people were going to perceive me as I spoke, right? I was still scared of like what people were going to think. And I really think I'm an idiot. Am I going to think, I look like a moron, whatever. And I had all these ideas that like I couldn't put two words together before I started stumbling, all these different limiting beliefs. But here's the key. I finally realized that it wasn't about me. It was about sharing a message with someone else that needed to hear it. And even if I did do the stupidest things, right? And if I did do some things that where I just sounded silly, right? Even if you do those things, right? If you do say something right, 1 out of 10 times, and the right person hears that and you can change their life, isn't it still worth it? And when you finally adopt that idea that it's not about us, it's about serving someone else, the crazy thing happens in that we can decide sometimes. Tony likes to say a lot of times we'll do so much more for other people
Right.
than for our own selves, right? And
Yep,
so if
yep.
we do it for our kids, if we do it as an example for our kids, if we do it as an example for our friends and family, and we show them what's possible, that's an opportunity. Or if we do it for a stranger that doesn't know about, in my case, personal finances. There's so many people in the United States specifically and around the world that never get just the basic understanding of personal finances. It's my responsibility to help people because I got lucky. I told you I was lucky from day one, and I was lucky, but it's my responsibility now to share that wealth. It's my responsibility to go out there and help other people to create wealth in all aspects of life so that they can go out and share with other people. And it's this ripple effect. And when you get outside of yourself, you'd be amazed at the things that you can do.
Well, in speaking, I have these two things to really add in, Michael, right? Number one is that nobody wants you to be a bad speaker. Everyone's actually cheering for you because just go back and sit in the audience for a second. I mean, what's your thought going, God, I really want the speaker to suck. I want to spend 60 minutes of my life sitting here suffering with a crappy speaker. No, everyone is cheering for you. All right. And then the second thing I've always learned about speakers, right? To be an outstanding speaker, you have to be a great speaker. And to be a great speaker, you have to be a good speaker. And to be a good speaker, eventually, you got to start and be at least once a very bad speaker. And then you're right. Some people never take this step. And it's like, it's too scary. So they never go through this progression. But, it's why I've chosen, right? The spoken word is really something super important and powerful to me. Communication is where a lot of our stuff happens. Like you're a tech guy like me, this is where computing language is so important. But the language that we as humans are programmed in, is our language, whatever language it is. In this case, it's English for us. And that's why it's been so important to study with that. We're almost out, Michael, but let me just ask this great question. Michael, if there's only one thing that people like Christian who's listening to here would remember from this interview, what would you want that one thing to be?
I think the one thing that I want you guys to remember is that we've got this one life to live and this one great opportunity to serve. And so if we remember that on a daily basis, we're going to show up in a different way. And when we start to act in service of others, then life truly does change. It truly makes all the difference. And I will tell you that when you do that, when you step out on that faith, that's when the luck falls into place. I kid you not. That's when things open up. I have countless stories. I told you some of them today, but there's countless stories of things that just open up for you. And the best thing about that is you get to serve other people. You get served well beyond what you even thought was possible. And I think that's the way it should be. And it, people, I kind of laugh. Sometimes people are like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. I'm like, well, actually you can. if you believe you can.
I'm a baker. Let's go.
Yeah. So, I think that's the one thing I want to share, John, is that, if there's something that is holding you back, ask yourself why. What's holding you back? Is it because you're worried about what people are going to think about you? And in the grand scheme of things, does it really matter, right? We can't control what other people think about us, but we can always control what we think about ourselves. Right. And we know why we're doing something. We know our greater purpose. And when we tap into that and we act, it doesn't matter what other people think. And when you know that you're operating in that space, you'll have nothing to regret ever in life, in my personal opinion. So I would encourage you to tap into that. And if you're scared, I say, great. Be scared and take action anyways, because those are the moments that we really get to change. And And like you said, John, if you're willing to be, if public speaking is your number one fear, like it was mine, you have to be willing to be a bad speaker. But remember, if you can affect just one life, right? If you become the answered prayer to someone, I think it's all worth it. And I think as well in your heart.
Oh, well, I want to share two last things here. Number one, Michael, I learned this at National Speakers Association. You can use this as a gift going forward. And number one, it's goosebumps don't lie. Right? And so I got some over here on this side. I love your co-create with God, right? Goosebumps don't lie. If you hear something and it resonates with you, pay attention, just like what Michael's saying. And number two is make sure and click Michael's link. It's up here inside of the description for this program. You can follow up or make sure and get his book or listen to his podcast. Let me tell you, Marlon is an extremely, truly extraordinarily human being. And Michael, I'm a little jelly on this side that you got a podcast with them. I'm going to listen to the rest of the episodes, especially the first ones, because I really enjoy seeing where somebody come from and where they got to. By the way, if you're listening to this, make sure and hit subscribe or like. All these podcasts are getting re-released at engagingvirtualmeetings.online. And by the way, if you want to be a guest, just like Michael, and you want to use your voice, click engagingvirtualmeetings.com/meet, select interview, and you too could be the next guest here on Engaging Virtual Meetings Podcast. Michael, thank you so much for your precious time. And I look forward to the next time we get a chance to connect and really do something awesome.
Thank you so much, John. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks again. And make sure hit the button and we'll see you next time. Video next time. Next time. Come on. This is the best part of the show. Next time. Oh, wait. I know why. The toolbar's in front of my button. Next time. Here.
Going star people and keep